Elizabeth Bathory counters the debate in Young Girls and Women's Blood. Belle Gunness, the butcher of men. Myra Hindley, the child killer. Serial murders, let alone murders, carried out by females are rare. Women only account for about 14% of violent offenders and for about 16% of serial killers apprehended in the US since 1820. All the more interesting. What must happen for a female to kill, and to kill repetitively even? I've previously spoken about chaos being represented as a dark feminine force in the stories of old. This devouring mother represents what can be conceptualized as the allure of a death wish, a return to the womb that offers peace but rejects life. I've spoken about this previously in reference to Munchausen by proxy and the Peter Pan syndrome. Make sure to check those videos out if you're interested to learn more about it. What they have in common is the psychological presence of a powerful mother imago that sucks life energy out of one, usually due to negative connotations of the feminine as a result of negative experiences of the mother symbol, e.g. because of a lack of a nurturing feminine figure or presence of an overwhelmingly controlling feminine figure in one's life. This made me think about the similarities between the concept of a female succubus, a demon that preys on men sexually, and the modus operandi of the female serial killers, which tends to be rather vampiric in nature. There's a male counterpart as well, the incubus. However, in this video, we'll be looking primarily at the succubus unless I refer to the incubus specifically, all in an effort to construct a profile of female serial killers, which tends to be rare and therefore surrounded by a lot of mystery. As usual, bear in mind that there's an exception to every rule, but there's also often an underlying pattern. The purpose of my videos is as usual to uncover potential hallmarks that can be present alone or in group. Here we'll also consider single murders, but only those motivated by self-interest, not self-defense homicide or homicide precipitated by domestic abuse, because most cases of female-perpetrated intimate homicide included evidence of a history of domestic violence, or in other words, woman battering by the partner, and the psychodynamics there differ vastly. In this video, we'll look into how and why the succubus attracts men and turns them into its prey, mutual psychology, or what men seek out in the succubus, obsessive love disorder, how the succubus manifests in a murderous woman, and characteristics of female killers, such as motive and modus operandi. Succubus in psychology and mythology. The female succubus seems to be a manifestation of the devouring mother in a feminine figure a man chooses to date. It's an oppressive female partner that drains energy out of its male prey. The word itself comes from the medieval Latin succube, meaning prostitute. This comes from the verb succubare, meaning to lie under, from which we have the verb succumb, which is to this day associated with negative connotations, mainly helplessness and loss of autonomy, such as in succumb to a disease or a desire. This makes perfect sense. Prostitutes symbolically represent unhinged sexual energy, whose victim it is easy to become, since they provide a service that can be acquired anytime without requiring any commitment, and also the danger of contracting sexually transmitted disease. The complications associated with it is why the word is associated with lying under, not only in the physical sense, but also metaphorically. It can easily become a burden, an addiction under whose spell one becomes ensnared. In mythology and folklore, the female succubus and the male incubus, beginning with Lilith and Lilu, are depicted as demonic forces. That alone can tell us that the realm in which they reign can be found in the unconscious. Before, of course, they were deemed actual demons. In fact, all witches and vampires are tied to the traits of a succubus. Eventually, as tends to be the case in mythology, these symbols became associated with actual human behaviors. This is why women with their traits are, to this day, referred to as witches, medusas, harpies. I'm very fond of etymology because looking at how these words came to be can often elucidate the original concept they had arisen from. Take, for example, the word harridan, today defined as, quote, a strict, bossy, or belligerent old woman, end of quote, in the Oxford Dictionary. It seems to have come from the French haridel, meaning old horse, and slang, referring to a decayed strumpet. A horse is a mare, which gave rise to the word nightmare, which comes from the Mara or mare in Nordic and Slavic folklore, a spirit called Mara that rides on people's chests while they sleep and gives them bad dreams, nightmares. The connection with horses doesn't end there. See the word nag, for example, and is actually rather significant as the symbol of the horse in analytical psychology represents life energy, the libido, and links to the mother archetype. As Lacan once remarked, l'inconscient est structuré comme un langage. The unconscious is structured like a language. To continue, the female succubus tends to appear in dreams, specifically nightmares, and tends to signal an urgent psychological conflict that should be made conscious and tends to behave as a life-sucking force or vampire. Now, such dreams tend to manifest themselves in men with a mother complex, in which there is an image of a perfect but unrealistic woman that had usually arisen due to the actual mother having been overpowering but admirable. He seeks her out in other women, which manifests as the Peter Pan syndrome I had talked about before, where the man has trouble having a permanent relationship with a woman. The succubus then appears in dreams to warn the man that this wishful thinking doesn't have a realistic manifestation in the waking world, and will drain him psychologically unless he decides to stand firmly on the ground. No woman is perfect as she's a human being, and the man must realize this. This is the message of the succubus. The blood here is the life force that's drained away by the passive dreaming. He must therefore stop screwing around, quite literally, and settle down with someone. Such succubus is only one of potential split of complexes, as Jung had put it, which comprise of rejected aspects of ourselves that, however, continue leading a rambunctious existence in the subconscious. This is how they exert an influence over our feelings, attitudes, and interactions we're often not aware of. Such men will either swap partners with great frequency or seek out a partner that resembles the controlling, devouring mother, a female succubus incarnate. Such women tend to be controlling, possessive, jealous, unrelenting, and it's very difficult to break off any contact with them, let alone terminate the relationship. That clutches perpetuation of one's possessive mother. Such mothers tend to raise dependent men that are bound to return to the safe but pathologic haven of the devouring mother's embrace in the mother herself or another woman that behaves just like her. Such mothers tend to harbor this paradoxical idea that they must kill to save, and this notion is acted upon in the woman that actually kills those who are in her care. What immature men seek in the succubus is to be engulfed by the womb once more. The woman succubus can appear very charming. She tends to place emphasis on her looks, fabricating a powerful persona to attract others and to compensate for the chaos inside. Men dig their own graves as they fall for her, only to be unable to get rid of her. A great example in fiction is Lila from the TV show Dexter. She brings out the reckless and chaotic out of Dexter, which he at first enjoys, but it soon ends up compromising his hidden identity as he becomes cockier, i.e. he lets his shadow control the conscious. Writing a manifesto thanks to its special agent Lundy figures out he has a law enforcement background, narrowing down the search to the department he works in. Lila sets her own house on fire to keep him close and almost get him killed. Dexter's sister Deborah herself warns him, pointing out that, quote, she's a vampire, end of quote, but he's under her spell until the mask slips. Now, how is such a succubus created, and why is it so obsessed? When and why is the line between possession and murder crossed? In the US alone, the prevalence of obsessive love disorder, not an actual disorder, beware that the DSM likes to turn everything into a disorder, has been estimated at between 5 to 10%. This love addiction can be defined as maladaptive, pervasive, and excessive interest in the partner and insistence that the relationship continue despite the partner's rejection. In more severe cases, it can be driven by or tied with psychosis, narcissistic PD, OCD, erotomania, or other comorbidities. It hasn't been researched well enough, but so far it seems that it predominantly affects women. A recent love addiction study has shown that being female was associated with low levels of self-esteem and high levels of love addiction. Ambivalent attachment style is strongly positively associated with obsessive love and can even predict it. Ambivalent subjects have unstable behavior and emotion, heavily depend on others, and have a pathological fear of abandonment, which all explain why they would have a hard time letting someone go. This style consists of preoccupation with gaining the caregiver's attention, extreme distress in response to his or her absence, and ambivalent patterns of resisting and clinging to contact, all due to inconsistent parenting. And voila, we have a succubus. In adulthood, these interactions persist in romantic relationships through constant, unsubstantiated worry that the partner doesn't love them, and excessive dependence along with reactive anxiety, even hostility in response to the partner's absence, even if it's only suspected. The goal of the killing is then to secure something, whether it be the partner or finances. In fact, 52% of female killings are financial. A good example of this escalation in romantic killings is the murder of Travis Alexander, aka the case of Jodi Arias. Prior to his death, her boyfriend Alexander mentioned to his friends that she, quote, had been stalking him, accessing his Facebook account and slashing his car's tires, end of quote. Although the defense argued that she killed him in self-defense, Alexander sustained, quote, 27 stab wounds, a slit throat, and a gunshot wound to the head, end of quote, which strongly undermines the argument. Arias seems to have been possessive, manipulative, and jealous beyond the reasonable. When we peel away the outer layer of this obsessive love, what we discover is often a covert low self-esteem, which has indeed been found to be significantly associated with love addiction. It gives rise to the extreme need to possess, control, be protected by the partner, to the excessive dependence on and fear of loss, and to unrealistic idealization of the partner. This kind of quote-unquote love becomes less about reciprocity and the other person's well-being and wishes, but more self-centric, egotistical, and very damaging. It becomes clear that their self-hatred as pathologic fear of loss is about the damage it would cause oneself and stems from insecurity. Hence the suicidality when the person sees their actions for what they are. Much as a narcissist, however, it's a hunger that can't be quenched. Nothing is ever good enough until the personality develops. Symbolically, in the female succubus, the nurturing maternal side, the traits of the archetypal grey mother are repressed, underdeveloped, and converted into a weapon of the terrible mother. This is why we see women in nurturing roles such as nurses misusing their tools to kill. It's also something we're seeing on the global level too. It's a pressing issue in our era that we're cutting our link to what grounds us. The preservation of family, community, country, and identity are nurturing mothers. They've been thrown into chaos, turned into a weapon that divides, and so the dark side of the mother has emerged with pathological power. This is the kind of woman that's being empowered. As Thompson put it, quote, "Man cut the umbilical cord to the grey mother with a sword, and that sword has been hanging over his head ever since." End of quote. He also brilliantly points out that, quote, "If the feminine is totally repressed and blood, nature, and the esoteric dimension of the heavens totally wiped out, then a terrible situation is created, which will necessitate the appearance of another avatar of evolution, a Lilith of transformation through destruction." End of quote. The same is true for the individual woman. Without cultivation of the nurturing traits, when her mother, for example, makes sure her physical needs are met and thus appears caring, but then throws it in her face or abuses her psychologically, creating this ambiguity, it's hard to develop a connection with one's caring feminine side. It's then this identification with one's or the terrible mother that can even lead to murder. When does it become serial? Serialists differ from one-time killers, of course, because they kill repetitively, and that alone implies presence of a pattern that's projected continuously rather than one that results from a specific situation or interactions with a specific person. In fact, most one-time murders occur among relatives and result from a domestic dispute, emotional outburst, or similar. In serialists, however, we're often dealing with a different psychopathology. Most report that first they fantasize about killing someone, a stranger. Over time, the fantasy becomes more specific, focusing on someone they know or have seen. The fantasy is so persistent that eventually they feel compelled to act on it. The murder brings a temporary relief, but as the fantasies return, so do the killings. There's a cycle precipitated by a wish for dominance and sadistic love for the object, followed by withdrawal into fantasy or dissociation and denial. This pattern tends to be present in both male and female serial killers and tends to stem from the experience of child abuse. Let me know in the comments if you'd like a video about the psychology of serial killers in general. However, there are some key differences between the two. In women with the psychopathology discussed, the act of murder itself tends to be precipitated by misplaced hatred or a desire to possess and swallow, i.e. symbolically make part of oneself. The first may be due to the woman seeing the other as her narcissistic extension and treat them as she had been treated by her own mother, for example. But this is more common in infanticide. The latter tends to be the case in romantic relationships. Statistically speaking, the most common motives of female killers tend to be financial gain, lust, thrill, and power seeking. The preferred weapon of choice in murder is gun, regardless of gender. Other than that, in women it's a sharp weapon, such as knife, and they are 7 times as likely as men to choose poison as their murder weapon, whereas men tend to prefer using blunt objects, beating, or strangulation. Most interestingly, men are least likely to kill intimates when they kill, whereas women are most likely to kill intimates. Female serial killers are often referred to as quiet killers. Recently, there has been a horrific case in the UK of a serial killer nurse that was targeting neonates. As discussed in my video about the Gypsy Blanchard case, this isn't uncommon. These women tend to seek out a position in which they're seen as carers. In fact, out of known American female serial killers from 1800s to 2015, 64% were involved in the healthcare industry. They misuse their role to establish dominance over their prey, or kill to save or possess from their point of view. Others often see them as charming and caring figures, the persona they carefully fabricated. Women serialists often employ a modus operandi that substantially differs from that of men, who tend to be more explosive. Instead, they tend to be subtle, secretive, like a snake. The approach is more devouring, with a goal to obtain something, whether abstract or concrete. Sexual violence is relatively absent in female killers, whereas it's prominent in their male counterparts, but this could also very well be due to biological differences.